Hello everyone and welcome back to the Great Book of Grudges. My name is Nathan and we're back with more faction focused stuff as, well, there's a lot of races for Core 9 to be in fact, and what I want to do today with this specific video is focus around Bretonnia, one of the launch factions and a faction that, well, let's be honest, a lot of us have missed very dearly. They got squatted very early into the Age of Sigmar, and a lot of people haven't been able to pick up their models, which is a massive shame as, yeah, those models did age quite well, at least I think so. They are very, very pretty. I've been painting up a lot of knights. You've been seeing them on the community tab. It's really nice to see them back, especially with some new digs. So, with that being said, we're going to do the usual like we just did with the Warriors of Chaos yesterday, and yeah, let's have some fun with it. Obviously, I won't be covering like the whole book. I'm not going to go over every single point cost. This is out of respect to Games Workshop. And yeah, it's not going to be that long until you guys are going to be able to see everything anyway. So yeah, let's begin. So this is the complete roster for the Bretonnians. For characters, you can have up to 50%, and that is 0 to 1 of a Duke. That is only one Duke throughout your whole army if you choose to have one. 0 to 1 of a Baron or a Prophetess per 1,000 points, and then as many Damsels, Paladins, and Sergeant-at-Arms as you can take. For core, you need 25%, and that is Knights of the Realm on foot, and or Mounted Knights of the Realm, units of men-at-arms or peasant bowmen, and this is a really interesting one. Knights Errant, but you can only have one per unit of Knights of the Realm on foot or Mounted Knights of the Realm. This is actually kind of good because you'd expect Knights Errant to be a lot weaker, but they are still Knights, so they're still going to be quite powerful. They're obviously cheaper than Knights of the Realm, and it would be a tad unfair that exploit list from 6th edition Storm of Chaos ended up coming back. So yeah, I'm quite happy about that. For special, we have 50% once again, and that could be Squires, Questing Knights, Pegasus Knights, and Mounted Yeomen. There's no limit there as long as it falls within the point limits. And finally, up to 2 units of Battle Pilgrims per 1,000 points. That would also include the Grail Reliquary too. And then finally for rare, we've got up to 25%, and that is Grail Knights and 1 Field Trebuchet per 1,000 points. Overall, the Bretonnian army is very much the same from what we've seen in earlier editions. There are a few new additions, well, really more returning additions, like the Sergeant-at-Arms and the Squires, but we'll be talking about them a little bit later on, because I'm still counting them as new. I mean, the last edition I played was 8th, which, you know, was unceremoniously killed off in, 2015? Oh god, it's been a while, hasn't it? But yeah, you know, there is actually a pretty good, well-rounded roster. Some people might see this as a bit limited, but keep in mind that it's with the fantasy of the faction itself, and Bretonnia is focusing very heavily on knights. I was kind of expecting a few things here and there, and we'll talk about that later on in a what's missing situation, because there's some stuff that's been implemented through Total War and obviously through lore, which would have been grand here as units, to be honest. Alright, let's talk about Vows. As you are aware, Vows are a very common thing within Bretonnia. A lot of their roster is going to have them. Certain units will start with certain Vows, and you can even upgrade them to have, for example, the Questing Vow and the Grail Vow, or the Grail Vow. So let's talk about this here. The Knight's Vow is pretty simple, right? You don't have to make a panic test when a unit of peasants is destroyed within 6 inches of you, or even if they flee right through you, because the peasantry doesn't matter here, right? Then when you get the Questing Vow, this is where things get a little bit better. Your unit will have the Stubborn special rule, and you can reroll any Fear, Panic, or Terror tests, which is quite useful if you're going to be dealing with, say, for example, a lot of Tomb Kings, which is going to be a common occurrence, and the Peasantry stuff also comes into effect here. Keep in mind that when you have these vows, by the way, characters with the Knight's Vow, Questing Vow, and so on cannot join any Peasantry units. However, there are ways to be able to do so, which we'll talk about later with the Virtue system. And then finally, we have the Grail Vow. So how it works here is you will get immune to psychology, magic attacks, and stubborn special rules, which is pretty good. And not only that, but you will always have the Blessing of the Lady, and you don't need to pray at the beginning. So your Grail Knights and stuff like that will jump in and start doing some damage. I still suggest praying if you've got loads of other types of Knights, because it's quite useful. But if you're going to be one of those characters that are going to push in, yeah, that all depends with you. Obviously, this isn't all the vows. There's vows in the Arcane Journal, but we talked about that in its own video. This is baseline vanilla Bretonnia. Alright, we're going to talk about the special rules now, and the Blessing of the Lady is back, which is basically let your opponent have the first turn, and you get the following benefits. Keep in mind that that is only for the units that can have the Blessing of the Lady, but that is a 6 upward save against any wounds suffered, or a 5 upward save against a strength 5 weapon or higher, which is pretty damn good. Now, one thing to note here is that you cannot get the blessing if there is no like start turn and stuff. There's some scenarios that have that. And the second thing is you cannot have the blessing if you're playing against another Bretonnian faction. So 2 Bretonnians against each other will not get the Blessing of the Lady. Naturally, it's very important to note that you can lose the blessing, that's another special rule, and that happens if you flee or if you refuse a challenge of a character. But fall back in good order does not count as fleeing. Finest Warhorses is pretty damn good, so when you have this special rule, when you make a charge, a flee, or even a pursuit, you may re-roll any natural rolls of 1 before discarding any of the required dice. So yeah, that means that you could potentially get an even better charge. So yeah, really happy about that. Lance formation remains, and don't you worry, I'm going to have a full video regarding formations. I'm just not doing it here just in case any other factions will benefit from this, as I've not been able to look through everything at the time of recording this video fully. But if you've played 6th edition Bretonnia and so on, it's pretty much just lance formation, and you get a bunch of attacks from every unit on the side, but nothing on the middle from the groups, barring the guy at the very front. So for example, I am running Knights of the Realm in groups of 10. That would be a unit of 1, 2, 3, 4, and 4 in terms of ranking. And as you can imagine, a fair amount of those are actually going to be able to hit when it comes to their charge. And finally, we have Peasantry Special Rule. Once again, you know, the Knights basically ignore peasants and don't suffer panic for that. And also within this special rule, their standards cannot be counted as a trophy of war. We'll be talking about this later on in the whole situation with victory points and just in general there. As you can imagine, there's a lot of videos coming out, and there's just so much I want to talk about. Knightly Virtues are back, and Virtues are essentially a title system where you can get a few extra bonuses towards your characters that are able to take Knightly Virtues. And it's actually quite cool because this can change how a character plays or their functionality in a battle. The price of the Knightly Virtues does vary quite drastically. The most expensive one that I can see at the moment in the vanilla book is 70 points, and the cheapest one is 5 points. But the idea here is to be able to have Knightly Virtues, and again, more customability for your characters. Your Bretonnians are very much all going to be very much the same, because, you know, it's an army of knights, but it does actually help to be able to play around. So what I'm going to do here is give you 3 examples from random picks, but the idea is just to show you what they do. So the Virtue and Knightly Temper is 70 points, but this gives a character D3 attacks in the turn that they charged and Hatred or Enemies special rule. Each virtue can only be chosen once per army, by the way, so you can't actually like have a lot of blender characters, but that's already quite good. You might get 1 extra attack, you might get 3. It's a gamble, but the Hatred also helps there too. Virtue of Empathy, you know, a Duke, a Baron, or a Paladin can actually join up with a unit of peasants, just in case you want someone on foot and you want them to be able to join up with a man-at-arms block, because some people might do that. That's 5 points, by the way, so it's quite cheap. And finally, for the example, I'll give you the Virtue of the Joust. This is a model with this virtue can reroll any failed rolls to wound when using a lance. I know that might not sound the most interesting, but believe me, I have pretty bad rolls historically, so this one's going to be useful. Plus, it's only 20 points, so really, it's not that expensive, especially when you're running a 2,000 point army, right? Overall, it's a really cool system. If you're going to be playing Bretonnia, I would make sure that you don't forget about this, because I was writing a few lists, sometimes I was like, wait, I'm forgetting something. It happens, it honestly does happen. Just have a little checklist, well, at least maybe that's just me, but I like to have a checklist when I'm writing armies. Mind you, I am doing this in an Excel format instead of like an app. I'm not sure if they've got plans for an app, by the way. I've not asked, but yeah. Alright, let's talk about magic, because we do have spells, the Law of the Lady, and it's going to work in the same system as you'll have your generic laws, and then you'll be able to switch out spells for the spells that you do want from this specific law. When it comes to generic laws, you have battle magic, elementalism, and illusion. The first one is the Lady's Gift. This is an enchantment spell with a casting value of 7+ or 10+ and a range of 12 inches. It remains in play, and what this does, it gives you a regeneration save of 6+. However, if you get a 10+, it gives you a regeneration save of 5+, and this can actually be cast whilst a friendly unit is in combat. The second is Burning Gaze. This is a magic missile with a casting value of 10+, and the range is 5d6 inches. So this one is a little bit more of a gamble. However, you draw a straight line from the caster's base, and any enemy model whose base falls under that suffers a strength 4 hit with no armor save permitted. You can still do a ward save or regeneration though. Overall, it's a pretty good spell, especially if you're getting quite close to a horde, or if there's a conga line of enemies, which can happen, coming for you. Just try your luck and see if you can really hurt as many things as possible. And lastly, we have the Lady's Wrath. This is an enchantment spell with a casting value of 9+, its range is on self, and is a remains in play spell. Whilst the spell is in play, the caster and their mount, and any unit they've joined, get +1 strength. This is to a maximum of 10, and also increases their armor-piercing characteristic of their weapon by 1. So overall, this is a pretty good buff. You can have your spellcaster in a unit of knights, for example, and you'll be able to do a lot of damage. Or if you've got them with some mounted yeomen, and yeah, you want to really use them into combat, get in for the flank and so on, the extra armor piercing and the extra strength is fairly decent. Overall, I like the spell. My biggest issue with these unique laws is it's not a full law, it's just 3 spells. Maybe in the future, you never know, plans can change. We've seen Warhammer Fantasy evolve over the many years, but yeah, I mean, overall, pretty good. It's better than the system of the Warriors of Chaos, which we talked about yesterday. Alright, let's talk about what's new, and keep in mind that this stuff isn't really new, it's just returning from very old editions, but that doesn't make it any less exciting. Especially the Knights on Foot. It's about time that we actually started getting these lads back. We're going to talk about the Sergeant at Arms first, because it's a new type of character. It's essentially just a peasant character. Hand weapon, light armor, you know, movement 4, weapon skill 4, ballistic skill 2, strength 4, toughness 3, 2 wounds, initiative 4, 2 attacks, leadership 7. It's only 45 points too, which is actually quite good. You can get a decent amount of upgrades, you know, halberds, additional hand weapons, cavalry spear if you've got it on a mount, on a warhorse, which is the 25x50s, and you can get them with a shield too. I like it. I think my only issue with the Sergeant at Arms, to be honest, is the lack of bow upgrade. It would be nice to have a character with a bow, because some people are going to be doing that whole Agincourt list, and I mean, who could blame you? It's kind of meme-worthy. Plus, with 30 range, you know, it's pretty tasty. But overall, yeah, it's pretty good. The special rules are levies, peasant's duty, peasantry, and warband. We'll be talking about universal special rules as time progresses. Again, my only issue is the bow. I have a stupid amount of archers. I would love to have some characters attached to it, which had bows, so we could have a little bit of fun there. And yeah, I almost forgot. The Peasant's Duty is basically just like the Knightly Vow, but with levy units instead of peasantry, which is like stuff like Peasant Bowmen and so on. They've got the levy special rule, so you can ignore panic tests for them and so on. And you can also have them reroll the panic tests if they are in command range of the Sergeant at Arms, which ultimately is quite a good thing. So squires are a thing. I'm not too sure if there's just going to be a new model for them or something, but it's a range unit. Hand weapons and longbows. Again, that gives you a second longbow unit. Stats are pretty average at best, but 7 points a model. It can't go really too wrong, especially since they are a little bit better in melee combat. I mean, 1 extra weapon skill than the Peasant Bowman, so yeah, that's not too bad. For some reason, when I saw squires when they originally showed off the list, I was expecting a melee unit, to be honest. You know, a little bit light armory, but I mean, this kind of works too. We got move through cover, open order, peasantry, skirmishers, and vanguard, but you can also give them scouts and fire and flee. My cat decided to slam himself into my face. But yeah, I mean, overall, decent unit. The fact is, 30-inch range. I'd still probably be going with Peasant Bowmen, though, if I can be perfectly honest. It just feels like they've got more options and they're cheaper too. The last thing is the Knights of the Realm on foot, which I know a lot of people have been quite excited for. Now, yeah, same stats as a standard Knight of the Realm, the only thing is that you don't have a horse, and, 11 points. For the first time in a while, you can actually have some weapon options too, so you can actually have them with hand, weapon, and shield if you so wish, or if you want to have a little bit of fun, have them with the great weapons. Now, I don't have one of these boxes, but I absolutely can't wait to get my hands on one because, I mean, come on, great weapons, right? I'm a big fan of those types of weaponry, and it's just nice to see that. And in terms of special rules, again, same as the standard Knights of the Realm. The only difference is that you have Furious Charge and nothing to do with, like, horse stuff. So no Swift Stride on foot knights, right? Unless somehow the Bretonnians in the vineyards discover how to make Red Bull, and then you could just see a bunch of dudes running around like absolute lunatics. Obviously, it's going to be known better when we start seeing them in practice and so on, because they're obviously going to have a little bit less armor than the mounted version because no barding. But I do think that this is going to be a unit that people are going to be running a lot. If they are big fans of Brionne, for example, yeah, axe troops are going to be quite useful. If you want to go with a theme, of course. It depends on your playstyle, but I've already got it in my head that I'm going to buy 1-4 unit and I want a second unit. I would love to see how they could perform. Plus, again, 11 points, not really a bad thing, to be honest. Okay, we're going to finish up with pros and cons now, and what you will notice is that the first pro and con is exactly the same thing. Small roster. On the pro side of things, you don't need to buy a lot of different units, which means that you can just play around with what you have and start doing your list from there. On the con side, it does mean that you do have a limited roster, which means that your armies are going to be fairly similar with one another. Overall, it's a good and a bad thing. I would have liked if Bretonnia would have actually had a few new things. For example, Hippogriff Knights, something that was introduced in Total War Warhammer 1, actually. I was about to say 3, but no, Bretonnia was a launch for 1. That would have been cool to have a, multiple wound, really heavy shock flying cavalry. And you never know if that stuff is planned for the future, actually, because we have to look at it this way. The way I'm seeing Warhammer The Old World's release now with the 9 core factions and so on is like Edition 0. Things will get better from then. We could potentially get new units if this series does get popular and people start buying into it, playing it, and showing Games Workshop that, people are invested in the Warhammer Fantasy setting. I don't want to sound too negative here because it is still a pro. I've had such an easy time writing lists for Bretonnia because I know exactly what I want. It's not like the Empire, which has a pretty varied roster in terms of weaponry and so on, and even then, there's nothing against the Empire, but when it came to Bretonnia, I was like, okay, I want Knights of the Realm, I want some Errants, I want some Pegasus Knights, because obviously people want flying pigeons. It's super, super easy. If I'm playing against undead, I want to take some fire attacks. If I'm playing against Warriors of Chaos, maybe go for some very heavy cavalry and, just try and smash them all out of the way as fast as possible if I get lucky with my charges. Another pro is that you're going to have smaller armies in general, because the knights are fairly expensive unless you're focusing very heavily on foot stuff, but this is Bretonnia, this is the faction which, it's known for horses, right? You're going to bring horses. Movability with the knights isn't too good. You're basically just going forward. But yeah, overall, the Bretonnia feels like Bretonnia, just obviously with a lot better additions there. Another pro is that your characters are very customizable. This is something that will be in the case for a lot of factions, but the Bretonnians, with the virtues and so on, you can make them super killy, or you can have them buff up. It just depends on your playstyle. The character stuff is very, very cool. Virtues are fantastic. The only issue I have really is the Sergeant at Arms has no bow. Literally my only issue, I think, with the character stuff. A con is really just missing multiple wound units. Again, I did mention it would have been really cool if we would have had stuff like Hippogriff Knights, because a lot of your stuff, barring, your characters and your war machine, has, 1 wound. Especially when Demigriff Knights have 3 wounds. It would be nice if we had Hippogriff Knights with 2, maybe 3 wounds, being really heavy shock flying cavalry. Again, if anyone from Games Workshop is listening, that would be fantastic for Bretonnia. I think that's the only thing that's really missing. It would be nice, especially since Hippogriffs are back. Hippogriffs, they made a big thing about them being back. would just be kind of cool, right? And core factor is a big thing here. Also, it's kind of weird that the Grell Knights, being who they are, only have 1 wound. It would just be really, really good if they had 2, because, well, first up, you know, they're 38 points a model. They're also Grell Knights, which are kind of like secondary characters, you know. You can treat a lot of these dudes like champions and so on. For the purposes of challenges, it just kind of makes sense to give them 2 wounds. It might be a bit too strong, and that's probably why they didn't, but you're not going to be running that much, and that's why I think they're selling them in groups of 3 instead of groups of 6. But you're never going to really bring like a death squad of them. I mean, you could. You could really go, I think, what, 10 and give them all everything there. But I don't see them being as used because 38 points a model baseline, and then +7 for a champion, +7 for a banner, +7 for a musician. You can take them with a magic standard up to 100%, 100 points, I mean. And you can give the commander a virtue and also magic items. So it's already a mini character, but just with 1 wound. So you get what I mean here, right? Overall, generally quite happy with the Bretonnians, especially just, you know, they were a faction that just didn't get a lot of attention during 8th edition. So I'm fairly keen to play them on the tabletop. It's why I've been painting so many Bretonnian Knights lately, because I was hyped up. You know, a launch faction means that these 2 factions are finally going to get the love and attention that they deserve. For those of you wondering, yes, it is possible to do peasant armies. I haven't really been trying it out too much, but I know some people, like a very popular modder in the Total War Warhammer scene, who wants to do a full peasant army. I would say it is doable, but you're going to suffer because you're going to be missing out on a lot of heavy stuff. But if you're here for a non-competitive game, you just want to have some fun, I mean, that's very, very doable. But yeah, let me know what you guys think about Bretonnia in the comments below. I do apologize if this video comes up a little bit later. I was in the middle of recording it yesterday, and unfortunately, there was a power cut and I lost all my files. Thankfully, I have all my notes written because I don't do that on a PC. So yeah, sometimes being old school helps. Have a good day, guys, and we'll see you all again very, very soon. There'll be another faction focus, I think, today. Well, at least I'm trying